All right, guys, our next guest is like a professor when it comes to fight analysis. His lab is, of course, Full Reptile, as well as the Dan Hardy Breakdown Show on BT Sport. But he joins us here in the Submission Radio Lab. It's not as impressive, but we have cool hats and some merchandise. And he's going to be previewing UFC 278 with the boys, one of our favorites to chat to, Dan Hardy. Dude, welcome back, man. Thanks for staying up. How has your night been? It has been a crazy sort of night of podcasting for you.
Yeah, it's been a busy day. It's been a busy weekend, actually, because I was at the PFL event this weekend over in Wales, which was amazing. And then came back and caught up on the fights from Saturday night, and then woke up today and prepared shows for today. So I've done 2 war rooms and a podcast today before speaking to you guys. So all my information is right in the forefront of my brain, which is good.
All right, good. Eat, sleep, breathe, fighting, and analysis. This is exactly how we like our Dan Hardy. So this is great. A lot to cover, so we'll get straight into it, man. UFC 278, a juicy card when you actually kind of look deep into it. And I want to kick off with the fight that, if we're being honest, we are most excited about, and that is Luke Rockhold versus Paulo Costa. 2 big returns, actually. And obviously the story of Luke has been a guy who many feel, we never truly saw his full potential or, the title reign that many people sort of expected of him. And obviously his career was absolutely devastated by constant injuries. As someone like yourself who's on the verge of his own return, what do you think are the biggest challenges that Rockhold is facing physically, as he's older now and looks to return after a 3-year layoff? I feel like this is the story before even the fight goes down.
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question, obviously, and he's coming off 2 knockout losses as well. The Yoel Romero one was, just about as brutal as you can get. And then, of course, moving up to light heavyweight and then losing to Yan. No shame in that, but there's still 2 knockout losses. And although he has this, he has a very confident front, and, there was a lot of bravado going into the defense against Bisping. And of course that backfired, and that turned out about as bad as it could have done for him, losing by knockout to Bisping. I just don't know where his head is at. I don't know where his confidence is at. I mean, I watched him hitting pads. He looks in great shape, physically very well conditioned. I can't really poke any faults at him physically because I don't know how he's feeling in himself. But what I do know is that the hurdle that he's got to get over psychologically is immense. And of all the people in the UFC that could struggle with that, Rockhold is right up there in my top 5.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it might be one of the toughest things in the fight game to get over, because you can't really, unless you get in there and you're having a live fight, it's not something you can recreate in sparring. It's not something you can recreate in the gym until you get in there and you're actually there in front of the crowd. I'm just wondering, I know you got a lot of guys in the gym, and I know you deal with a lot of fighters yourself. Is there any kind of training, any kind of process that you think could help someone mentally to come back from what Luke's come back from? Not to mention as well, he's in the public limelight and a lot of fans. He's got all that fan pressure as well, all those comments from fans. He's not exactly someone that nobody really knows of.
No. I mean, this is it. Not only is he a highly successful fighter, but he's a very successful model as well. And he's a good-looking dude, which naturally attracts a lot of animosity towards him. He's not the most eloquent and finesseful of individuals when it comes to carrying himself. He always looks quite uncomfortable in himself, in my opinion, which I think is a bit of a juxtaposition considering who he is and what he's capable of and what he looks like. But the thing is, when you've got someone that's, so what's his record? 16-5 is his record. I think he's all of his losses are knockouts. He's never had 2 back-to-back losses in his record before, and they've both been really bad knockouts. There've been long gaps in between the fights as well, which I also don't think is healthy. One way that Cowboy always got around the anxiety of competing was to just do it really, as regularly as he could. People are always like, Cowboy is crazy because he fights so regularly. But what would be crazy for Cowboy is to not fight regularly, because then that anxiety builds up, and then that starts to feel incredibly heavy. And you've got to think, Rockhold's been a long way away from a win for a good while. Lost the belt to Bisping. What did he beat? David Branch in between, and then he lost to her after that. It's just not a good run for him. And because there's been big gaps where he's had to sit and kind of stew in that 2 times knockout defeat soup that he's in, I honestly, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the only benefit in this one is that Paulo Costa is in a very similar situation.
Yeah.
So the strength I put on Luke Rockhold's side is the fact that he has been knocked out before and he has picked himself up and he's turned it round and won the belt. He had losses before he was the UFC champion. Costa's coming off his first 2 losses. He was on a 13-fight win streak, and I think honestly his ego is just as fragile. His self-opinion is very, very much dependent on his last fight, and his last 2 have been losses. Losing to Adesanya was a real eye-opener for him. I think he realized that there were so many more levels than what he was aware of. But I think he felt like he could have beaten Vettori. Came in overweight, didn't really seem to respect Vettori at all, and kind of got embarrassed over 25 minutes. I think both of these guys are pretty much rock bottom when it comes to confidence. It's who can muster the most in that first round to get the good start is where I see this fight going.
Yeah, it's fascinating because also people sort of speculating, hey, is this Costa trying to get fired by the company here? It's hard to understand when the last Paulo Costa was that we saw that was 100%. I'm just curious, Dan, before we speak about Paulo, I want to get your thoughts on this. Luke was on the show a couple of months back, or like a month ago, and he was talking about how he's really employed a lot of CBD, a lot of joints, and also microdosing mushrooms during this training camp. I'm fascinated by this. I just want to get your take on it. I mean, from a mental perspective and somebody preparing themselves mentally, maybe healing their brain a little bit going into a fight. What's your take on this? Because I know even Mike Tyson said he was microdosing and even on mushrooms in that comeback fight against Roy Jones Jr. He looked pretty good.
Microdosing can be a really, a very powerful tool. From the research that I've done and talking to fighters that are doing it, it's happening quite a lot. There are quite a lot of fighters that are doing it. From the ones that are very regimented and they're taking a set dose every other day or every day or whatever it is, to the more casual approach where they just kind of eat randomly, whatever they got in their hand at the time. And it's interesting because it's a very different approach to combat sports than you could have imagined 10 years ago. Like, you wouldn't be thinking that fighters would be leaning on these natural organic substances to help them out in any way. Certainly not psychologically. You would think, okay, yeah, CBD for pain management and all that kind of thing makes sense, but when you start getting into the deeper levels of this with the microdosing and even like a big dose from time to time, they can be incredibly useful, incredibly beneficial. You've still got to do the work yourself, though. You've still got to face that thing. You've still got to deal with what it is that's haunting you. Like, you can, Luke Rockhold, might be really benefiting from the changes in his brain chemistry of like speeding up his reaction time and helping him sleep better and whatever else that are the immediate challenges that he's dealing with in training camp. But at any point he could stumble upon a clip of him getting knocked out, and that immediately becomes all tumbling down again. It's not the answer to everything. I think it's interesting that he's using it, and I think it's good that he's open about it because, as I said, there are a lot of fighters that are using it that aren't open about it. There's no reason why you can't microdose. It's not on a banned substances list. It's legal in some states of the US now. I think we'll see a lot more people doing it, but there's still a lot of work to be done aside from that. It's not a fix-all. And I don't know whether Luke's at a place where that's going to be enough. He might need a serious sports psychologist to do some proper work alongside that to get any real benefit out of it.
See, that's a phenomenal theory. Like, there's obviously a lot of instances where people mask pain or they take something to mask pain without addressing the root cause. But yeah, to Rockhold's credit, he's been very open about it. He kicked off the interview with us just smoking a big fat joint. So, a lot of respect to him for that. With
CBD with me.
There you go. Look at that. Jesus, I wish we got the memo. Would have brought ours. With Paulo Costa, though, right? You mentioned he's in a similar position, and he is. And you literally called that Paulo Costa Adesanya fight perfectly. And Costa's spoken about how he was injured and he wasn't able to show the real him in the last 2 fights. And also the Fight Island circumstances seem pretty shitty for any fighter, if I'm being honest. But when you look at those fights against Vettori versus Adesanya, how much of it do you think was an X factor that was wrong with Costa, say sleep or injury related, as opposed to something that his opponents actually did to him to make him look that way?
I think there'll be many fighters that have sleep issues and travel issues and weight issues, and everyone's injured. I don't think it would have changed anything about the fight. Israel was just better than him. I think it's as simple as that. And I think that, even if Paulo can sail these things outwardly, like, I was injured, I wasn't at my best, didn't sleep, red wine, etc., etc. The only reason he lost that fight is because he wasn't technically good enough to beat Adesanya. I can't see it any other way than that, because he never got started. Like, Adesanya kept him on the outside the whole time. He hammered his lead leg. Then he started to get him to bite on that feint. Then he started to sting him in the face. Then when he started to bite on that jab, he started to come around the side with the kick. Like, there were multiple conversations going on, and it was a different language to what Paulo Costa was speaking. For me, that would have been far more of it. Like, you remember when Forrest Griffin fought Anderson Silva, right? And Anderson was kind of toying with him, and he got Forrest overcommitting and stepping forward onto big punches and pinged him on the way and knocked him out. The thing that stands out to me in that fight, knowing how self-deprecating Forrest is and how much fun he is to be around and how little he takes things seriously, he ran out of the octagon that night. And the reason he ran out is because all of a sudden he was aware that Anderson Silva was on an entirely different level. And I think Paulo Costa had that same realization against Adesanya. He couldn't touch him. He didn't do anything to him. He was embarrassed. And I don't think he showed any kind of improvement against Marvin Vettori. Whether he was injured or he just didn't take him seriously, he came in overweight, and he just didn't look motivated at all to fight in that. And even if you want to get fired, or even if you want to move up a weight class or whatever, you don't want to embarrass yourself on live TV like that, especially not because what Paulo Costa brings to the table is intensity and ferocity, and we didn't see any of that against Vettori.
Fascinating, man. Yeah. Well, I mean, and you look at him now, and he looks absolutely diced to the socks. So you get the sense that he's definitely taking something seriously. I wonder though, and I was saying this to Dennis sort of before we started, do you think Rockhold could employ a similar strategy to Adesanya? He talks about Costa. He thinks he's going to come in, be reckless, and get caught with something. It sounds to me like a guy who wants to stay on the outside and then try and catch Paulo, maybe frustrated like he did in the Israel fight. And I mean, Rockhold's long, he's rangy, he's got fantastic kicks. Do you think that might be the game plan from Rockhold come this weekend?
Yeah, I certainly think there are good tools in Rockhold's game that would be useful. This is Southpaw v Orthodox. And what we saw from Paulo Costa against Marvin Vettori was doing a good job of pressuring forward, working towards the outside foot, as a lot of people do against the opposite stance. And he was throwing that lead right jab over Paulo Costa's shoulder, which was forcing Costa to move towards the back leg of Vettori. Now, Vettori didn't have the long left leg that Rockhold's got, or, similar to what Chito Vera did to Dom Cruz this weekend. I could very much see Luke Rockhold walking Paulo Costa onto that high kick, especially if he conditions him early with those straight punches, because as we saw against Adesanya, he starts to do this reaching and lifting his head away, and that's where Rockhold's long legs are going to come around the sides. That could certainly be a good game plan for him, absolutely. I also think we can't underestimate Rockhold's grappling, though, and I know that, Paulo Costa is going to be a handful to take down and hold down, but wearing him down and beating him up and getting his arms filled with lactic acid and then taking him down, allowing him to scramble and taking submissions off the back of that. You remember what he did to Tim Boesch with that inverted triangle? Yeah. That was like in a mad tumble. I could quite easily see him catching Paulo Costa in something like that. But I have to underline all this by saying this is all dependent on his confidence. Like, if he's not confident, he's not going to throw that kick. He's going to throw it with hesitation. And if he throws it with hesitation and Paulo Costa covers that distance, he's going to find himself on the back foot out off balance. I think there's just so much based on the psychology of this this is why it's fascinating, but also very, very difficult to predict. Like, this is like having two Vitor Belforts stepping in there against one another. We don't know which one's going to show up.
And it's interesting because, like he said, it's for both sides. We see Paulo Costa, when he gets aggressive, when he doesn't get the payoff that he wants, we see he kind of mentally gets it's a little bit difficult for him when he doesn't take the guy out. And we saw it in the Vettori fight. He just thought he was going to go in there and implement himself in that fight, and when it didn't go his way, there were little lulls for him until he could figure out a way to do that again. And then again, with Luke Rockhold, what's going to happen if Costa can pressure him? What are we going to see there? It's going to be very interesting. I'm wondering, obviously with Costa, he's in his prime right now. He needs the win to get back into the middleweight relevancy. A lot of people are going to be wondering what he's going to look like, what's going to happen to him. But for Rockhold, how do you think a win here where do you think a win here sort of gets him into the division? Do you believe it sets him up for a title shot? Because you got to think Israel would love to fight a guy with a name like Luke Rockhold, a legend like that. But, Rockhold is also a little bit outspoken about fighter pay and the fact that he plans on retiring after he beats Israel. Do you think that stands in his way?
I think there are a few things that stand in Rockhold's way. I think he's, in being critical of the UFC is not particularly helpful. It's either going to accelerate him into fights that he's not quite ready for on this build back, or it's going to slow him down to the point where he's just going to be too old to be, for anybody to be caring about him as a top contender. What he would get with a win here is to put himself back in the position of being that name, because losing here, there's no value in Adesanya fighting him, of course, but a win, just one win over Paulo Costa, especially if he stops him, you can immediately make an argument for that fight to be made. That's a lot to be swinging on one fight. He has the name because he's Luke Rockhold, because he's a former champion. Mm-hmm. But if he doesn't get this win over Paulo Costa, he's just nobody to the division anymore. Of course, you could see him floating around having a few fights. I could see him being released and signing with Bellator and fighting Musashi, or, going over to One Championship and fighting Derrida. There are good options for him out there, but it's kind of the drums disappearing over the hill in the distance on the way out of his career. I don't think, unless he wins this fight, we're going to see him in a title shot. This is essential for him. I think Costa's got some time to rebuild, but I don't know about Rockhold. And if he gets stopped, three losses in a row, all by stoppage, I think we'll see him taking his gloves off on the way out the octagon.
Do you see, sorry to jump in, Kat, but do you see him as, because a lot of fans sort of see Rockhold as an interesting matchup for Adesanya? Do you see it like that as well? Or is that a fight where you see Israel? Is that a fight that you basically see as Israel's?
You've got to bank on Israel. Of course, if Rockhold comes out against Costa and, he looks good, he looks confident, especially if he takes him down and dominates him on the floor and submits him, then I'm going, okay, that's how he could be Adesanya. But right now, in the striking range, Adesanya still runs circles around him. Yes, Luke Rockhold could do something similar to Paulo Costa than what Adesanya did, but he couldn't replicate the same thing. Even what Adesanya was doing was a higher level of striking than what Luke Rockhold is aware of. And I know it sounds kind of silly me saying it, but until you kind of see it, it's like seeing behind a curtain and you're like, okay. There's a lot more going on in Adesanya's striking game than there is in Rockhold's. Rockhold's got some really good tools and techniques and a few tricks that he uses, but Adesanya's is multilingual in striking. It's a different thing.
I'd love to see that fight. I think Israel would as well. Just a name and a legend like Rockhold, and I'd be so sad to see Rockhold taking his gloves off this weekend. So I'm just hoping for a good fight regardless. If there is one thing you should take off, though, it is the bush, the forest that you have downstairs. You don't want to be taking off your drawers, your underwear, and then a whole bloody Amazonian forest rolls out. Also, it is Father's Day around the corner. So look no further than Manscaped, the Lawnmower 4.0, the greatest pound-for-pound grooming tool in the world, and also what might be the greatest gift you can give to dad this Father's Day, I believe September 4th, here in Australia. Don't rack your brain, man. I hate when these occasions come and it's like, oh man, another year, another this occasion, that occasion. What do I get this person for the billionth year in a row? Another gift. Make it easy. Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0, the Performance Package 4.0. Look after dad. He's getting older. He needs your help. He's got the bloody whiskers coming out of his ears, out of his nose, downstairs. You don't need to know that, but you want him to be the best version of yourself. Maybe you're a dad. Maybe you're looking in the mirror and you're like Leo in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's official, old bud. I'm a has-been. But that's all right. You're back in the game with the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. Keep those balls as smooth as eggshells. the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, which conveniently is in the Performance Package 4.0. Get rid of those nose whiskers, the ear whiskers. You'll be a brand new smooth man. You get the Crop Reviver, Ball Toner, and the Crop Preserver. So your downstairs section is always smelling VIP. And with the code submission, you get 20% off and free shipping. How good is that? The gift master. That's what you're going to be this Father's Day. Isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, man. 20% off with the code word submission and free shipping. Jump on it now. And with the big fights right around the corner, Cass, our friends at MyBookie have all the big odds for you guys to make some serious cash. Luke Rockhold at a plus 241. Paulo Costa minus 312. We've got Leon Edwards plus 273 and Kamaru Usman at a minus 357. You guys can use the code word submission now for 100% match bonus. That's right. 100% match bonus when you guys use the code word submission. Go to MyBookie right now. They have all the best odds no matter what the sport is, no matter what is happening. Make some serious cash this weekend, Cass.
100%. Also, I see everybody is going overseas because it's cold as shit right now here in Melbourne. Everyone's going to Bali. Well, if you want to save money on your next flights, change your geolocation with NordVPN to a different location and you can save money on flights. You know, the same flights cost different things depending on where you are in the world and where your browser thinks you are. So if you're in America, Australia, you change the geolocation. Now your flights are cheaper. It worked for us for UFC 246 with Conor McGregor taking on Cowboy Cerrone. Saved a lot of money on our flights. Also, Mexican Netflix is cheaper. There's a whole bunch of subscription services and just things in general that you probably buy every day online. They are cheaper in different countries. Certain pay-per-views are cheaper depending on where you are located. It's all thanks to NordVPN. The greatest thing also, if you go overseas and you're traveling, you're trying to watch your favorite shows, maybe they're not available in that location. Maybe you go on holiday. You're like, oh, cool, I'm going to fire up Netflix a little bit. Oh, no, sorry, it's not available in that location. Change your geolocation with NordVPN. Dennis was saying about your favorite show, The Bear. It's not available here in Australia. You change your geolocation with NordVPN. Now you've got it months prior to it even being released here. I've been downloading stuff on those free downloading websites where it's like you download, then you got to wait like 60,000 hours before you can download again. Change your IP address, and now you can download instantly. I have NordVPN running for my whole computer. Then I have the Chrome extension. So I literally have two IP addresses on the same computer. I'm downloading things at the same time. You're saving money and you're saving time thanks to NordVPN, the greatest VPN in the world. And best of all, no buffering and no speed throttling whenever you're streaming your favorite 4K entertainment. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, man. And don't forget about the security benefits. Stop people from stealing all your information. There's just so much to love about NordVPN. And we're recording this right now on the 16th of August here in Australia. But from the 17th of August, you guys can grab your exclusive NordVPN deal, which includes a huge discount off your NordVPN plan. Plus, are you guys ready for this? Four free months. 4 free months completely free, and it's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You guys could click the link in the description below or go to nordvpn.com/submission and get yourself sorted now. NordVPN, it's risk-free, and it changes your life forever.
Yeah, best of all, it costs like the price of a cup of coffee every month, so nothing to it, just to do it. 4 free months. Are you kidding me? Oh, man, I'm excited. I'm excited this morning. All right, I'm also excited about this main event. Looking at the main event, Leon Edwards rematching Kamaru Usman for the welterweight belt. It's easy to kind of look at it as to say, oh, Usman with how dominant and good he's looked. But, it gets pretty interesting the more you dive into it. Because even though Usman's striking has come light years in recent times, I mean, Leon Edwards is still better. He's still the better technical striker. And he's also taller. He's also longer than guys like, say, Gilbert Burns and Colby Covington. And he does an excellent job of fighting these patient, technical, and frustrating fights on the outside, frustrating for his opponents. So let's say Usman chooses to keep it standing. How do you think that goes for him?
I think it could potentially go really quite well. The challenge that Leon's going to have is the memory of the last fight. And this is why rematches always, for me, are so interesting, especially because there's a lot of time that's passed. Both of these guys have evolved a lot. They've both changed a lot. But I try and put myself inside the head of these fighters, and I think to myself, okay, if I'm Kamaru Usman and I'm kind of casually reminiscing about that fight before I'm falling asleep, and I'm trying to remember, what that fight felt like and how it felt to compete with Leon, I would remember how difficult he was to take down, I would remember when I was on the floor, I got tangled up in a triangle in the first round, and I didn't have it all my way in the first round, but I was able to slow him down and maul him. But I would also remember how much hard work that was. And I don't think if I was going into a 5-round fight, I would want to play that card again, not as a plan A. So I think Usman coming into this one is like, okay, plan B is wrestling if I need it. But with the efficiency of his jab cross at the moment, I think he's going to be confident to strike with Leon. And the challenge for Leon is that his reminiscent of the fight is every time he stepped on his front foot, Usman was disappearing underneath and driving him up against the fence. So he's going to be hesitant to throw. He's going to be kind of, am I going to go now? Is he going to level change? And this is where I can see Usman starting to like push Leon back a little bit with the striking. He lands a couple of those really solid stinging jabs. And then immediately, like Leon's got a double threat. Is he going to punch me or is he going to level change? And at what point do I do something and not get taken down? I'm leaning towards Usman by decision on this one. Of course, I think Leon's got lots of skills that he could bring to the table, but that double threat and that hesitation that I see from Leon, and Veronica and I were just talking about it on the Picks podcast. The point of difference between the two of them is that Usman is the supreme competitor. Leon can coast sometimes. He should have never got slapped by Nate Diaz. That should have never happened. Nate shouldn't have been able to lay a glove on him, but he kind of got lazy in that 5th round because he was having it all his way. And do you know what I mean? Like RDA, Cowboy, felt like there were fights he could have got them out of there. And that lack of, I'm going to take his head off, that's where Usman has the advantage in my eyes, both striking and grappling.
Leon made these comments about how he thinks this is the perfect time for him to catch Usman as he's getting older and his body's starting to break down. We keep hearing all these stories about Kamaru's knees, how he can't really run, how he's got all these physical issues. It's actually incredible that he's able to make this kind of weight and be in this kind of incredible shape with some of the limitations that he apparently has. What do you think about these comments that Leon has? Do you think it's kind of like two ships passing in the night and there might be something there?
I mean, it might give him the confidence to attack his base, and I don't think that'd be a bad idea. But anytime he's throwing kicks to Usman, he's going to be open up to level changes. And we talk about Usman and being a wrestler, etc., etc. If you look at his more recent fights, his wrestling is almost entirely defensive. When Masvidal goes sprinting at him, he just level changes and dumps him on the floor. Doesn't really bother about controlling him too much. Does the same thing with Colby Covington, 1 of 1 for takedowns in that fight as well. Like usually, earlier on in his career, you're looking at 10, 12, 15 takedowns against his opponents. That has almost completely disappeared out of his game. Doesn't mean he doesn't have it. And that's why Leon is going to be thinking about that constantly. If Leon takes the initiative, of course, he can start landing multitude of strikes on Usman. He can start disguising his low kicks, and he might be able to work on some of those, damaged body parts that he thinks Usman might be struggling with. But I just don't know at this stage. Usman still feels like he's getting better every fight. We saw the jab against Burns, we saw the cross against Masvidal, and we saw the hooks and the uppercuts against Covington. I would expect him to have new skills this time around, and I just don't know what they're going to be. Probably body shots, probably counters to the elbows of Leon. I don't know, but I know he's learning, and I think that he's enough of a competitor to be able to go, well, I need to work around this, but I can do this instead. I still think Leon's going to be beaten to the drum. He's going to be marching to the beat of Usman's drum, and that's the trap he needs to get out of, which is going to be the biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was speaking to Brandon Gibson yesterday, and he was saying how a lot of wrestlers who basically fall in love with their striking, right? And they kind of leave the wrestling behind. And he used Usman as an example because he's a guy who's criticized heavily by the fans and other people, which can weigh heavily on you. But Usman's a great example of a guy who, I don't know if I'd say has fallen in love with his striking, even though he employs it a lot more, but he's done it so successfully and he's looking better. And I don't know if Leon's necessarily the guy to sort of, test that theory or put him in that kind of danger to make him regret it. But looking forward a little bit, let's say it all goes well for Usman, which obviously is not 100% by any means. Usman said that light heavyweight is next for him. What do you think is more likely? Because obviously Khamzat, if he beats Nate Diaz, you got to think that's the next fight, right? Do you think it's more likely that Khamzat and Usman is next, or that Usman actually goes up and faces the likes of a Yuri or a Jan Blachowicz?
You know, there are big questions. I don't know as I see him making the move up to light heavyweight. I don't know as I see him jumping over middleweight. I can either see him, if he beats Leon, I can see him staying in the welterweight division and defending maybe against Chimaev or maybe against somebody else. They might manage to find somebody else to put in there before. Or, I mean, and this is, I don't want to upset you guys, but just speculating if Alex Pereira beats Adesanya, that would open up the opportunity for Usman to move up and fight and face Alex for the belt. That would be far more likely than him going up and fighting Yuri. I don't know how transferable his skills are. I mean, he's listed as being 6 foot. I would say he's a generous 5'11", and he's also got a 76-inch reach, which, I mean, well, Sean Woodson's on the card and he's a featherweight and he's got a longer reach. There are big guys out there just outside of the welterweight division on both sides. Like there are physical attributes that Usman benefits from right now. He's fast, he's powerful, he's got a good reach, and he's got that wrestling in his back pocket. But you start adding someone in there that's 20 pounds heavier and has the reach advantage and the height advantage, it becomes difficult. Alex Pereira, though, with his possible lack of wrestling, might be easy pickings for Usman at this stage in his career. So I think that is a possibility. We'll see. We'll see. I think so many things can twist and turn, and rankings don't mean anything anymore these days. I mean, Diaz is not ranked and he's fighting Chimaev. What if Nate Diaz beats Chimaev?
Oh man, what a way to go out! Now. It's the Conor fight all over again.
And I'll tell you, it's a crazy situation where, it's a friendship. Like Israel and Kamaru, they're friends, but it's also a crazy situation because it's not show friends, it's show business. So he's a guy that could go up to middleweight and potentially have 2 titles. I'm not sure how that fight would go, but he's skipping a division and going 1 division up just because of a friendship and because of the loyalty they have to each other. It's pretty remarkable. And
let me ask you guys a question, because I'm interested to see what you think of this.
Mm-hmm.
If it was reversed, if Adesanya was the welterweight champion and Usman was the middleweight champion, do you think Adesanya would move up and fight Usman for the belt?
If Israel was a welterweight champion, do you think he'd move up?
Or if Israel could make welterweight, for example, do you think Israel would offer the same courtesy to Usman that I'm not going to come and try and take your belt off you? Because I don't know why I feel like that's a one-way relationship from Usman. I don't feel like Adesanya would do the same thing if it was reversed. I feel like Adesanya would want that belt as well. You think
because Israel at the moment has the option where like he can go up to light heavyweight and we all know that he's never going to go to welterweight. You think that's why he's so kind of like, we're brothers and this and that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I definitely think so.
But, Dan, there's also an aspect to it. And it's, Kamaru Usman, unbelievable, pound for pound. You can't deny what he's done. But there's a certain magic to what Israel does where it doesn't matter. He could be in any weight class. He's always going to be bringing eyeballs to the way that he fights, the stuff that he does. It's almost like he doesn't need to go to any division. He could have stayed at welterweight if he was a welterweight fighter and still been a massive, massive draw. Whereas Usman, he's a big draw. But I feel like legacy-wise and from a fan's perspective, getting that 2 titles or 3 titles for him is something that could be needed. You know what I mean? It's kind of a little bit of 2 different guys. But it's definitely a fascinating situation, man. And if you guys want to break... Just
quickly, you got me thinking about the Israel thing, but then also there's a precedent where Israel's fought up at heavyweight before. So I guess maybe it's different when you're in a lower weight class, but you don't think Israel would say, let's say he was a welterweight, he would just jump up to like light heavyweight like Kamaru's doing, because Israel's whole thing is like, look, I don't want to be the best, by the boundaries of a weight class. I want to be the best in general.
I mean, I certainly think that it's a shame that he already went up and fought Jan, because I think it would be a more winnable fight and a more sellable fight if he would move up and fight Yuri without already having that loss to Jan.
Yeah,
I think Jan kind of showed the way to beat Adesanya. And I'm not saying that Usman would be able to do the same thing. I mean, there's a decent size and weight difference between Usman and Blachowicz, but I think Adesanya, I think he chose the wrong moment to move up. I think he looked at Yan and thought, he's an old boy. He's kind of slow. He's kind of hittable. And he didn't take into account that he's built like a tank. And I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like Adesanya he's overly competitive and he's very confident and he feels like he could step into any division as long as he could make the weight and take the belt. So why wouldn't he? I feel like Usman is constantly feeling like he has to prove himself, whereas Adesanya feels like he's already proved himself a little bit. And I don't know. I think they're at very different stages in their career, even though they're both champions. I'm interested to see what happens over the next few fights. And I do think, although of course, most people are going to pick Adesanya, even though he's got a loss to Alex, that would definitely open up the middleweight division for Usman. And it'll be, I'll just nip up and grab your belt back and then I'll walk away and go back to welterweight and you can pick it up again.
Yeah.
I could see him doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because with Adesanya, one of the things that people don't talk about as much is the frequency of his fights. So he's somebody who fights a lot, where we've had champions in the past that chose to maybe, we might wait 6 months, might wait 8 months, and then I'll pick an opponent. So I wonder at the end of Israel's run, what kind of record he's going to have and how frequently he's going to keep fighting. Because if he keeps fighting at the pace that he's fighting now, he could be one of the biggest names the UFC's seen, who's the most active, who's had the most amount of fights across the most amount of divisions. And that's super impressive as well. So there's a lot of stuff at stake. But the fact that he was able to get to the title so quickly and get it, and then now he's had all these defenses, he's planning on staying active. That team over there at City Kickboxing, they've really got some great things planned for him. So I'm really interested to see what happens. But guys, if you like the banter, you have to follow the man on Twitter and Instagram at Dan Hardy MMA. Of course, Full Reptile, the Dan Hardy Breakdown Show on BT Sports, one of the best in the business, The War Room, and of course his book Full Reptile, which is available here in Australia. And of course, you can get that online. A fascinating journey there and a lot of great stories. Dan, man, we're humbled to have you on this program, but after a huge day of podcasts for you to join us, it's even more humbling. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, man.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys.